This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. You know, we talk about a little bit of everything here. Identity, belonging, culture, politics, with a whole lot of curiosity, empathy, a bit of nuance, a little bit of spice. That sounds like a bit of me. Today we are talking about something that is part of our daily lives. I don't know what y'all's screen time is looking like, but mine is higher than it would like to be. And today I'd kind of like to talk about our identity-based spaces online, and you know how they can be healing and harmful at the same time. I don't know how y'all are feeling, but I feel like we're living in a time where the world just feels increasingly binary, like pro this versus anti that, or, you know, for a lack of a better word, woke versus anti woke. And then you've got the left and right divide. And it just seems like, you know, all of this is happening, especially online. And I think the wild part about it all, especially being online, is that it almost seems like we don't get to choose if we participate or not, because we're just pulled into the digital space and it pulls us in. And I don't know what your algorithm is doing, if you're living in an echo chamber or not, but online just seems like a whole other world to navigate. And yeah, today I wanted to talk about, you know, identity-based spaces online. Who knew that was going to be a tongue twister? Oh my gosh, it's going to keep me on my toes for the rest of the episode. But we'll be talking about identity-based spaces online and echo chambers, how they can be healing. I mean, there's a reason why we seek these places in the first place, how they form, how they harm, and why should we even care about this, and what can we do about it? Because I think the ultimate question that I would love to answer, or try to answer, is how do we hold onto our humanity in a world that keeps trying to split us into sides? But let's first of all talk about why we seek these spaces, because, you know, we're not coming together because of vibes or aesthetics. Like, it's because we want safety. We want a space for us to come together. And sometimes these spaces are hard to physically create, but there's always space online. And that sense of safety provides so much, like, trust and sense of belonging and like a safe refuge. And oh my God, someone needs to make a tally of how many episodes I have referenced bell hooks. I honestly, if I had $1 for every time I referenced her, I would be a millionaire, I swear to God. But in Bell Hooks' essay, Home Place, you know, she talks about how Black women created pockets of refuge within an oppressive world. You know, places where people could breathe and be themselves and be held. And I like this idea of home place, because I think these identity-based spaces are digital home places. And there's so many for so many different communities, you know, like Black Twitter. You know, it's not just jokes, even though Black Twitter does make me cackle like no other. It's very much shaped by political discourse, and has created global language, like, you know, ate and left no crumbs. I feel so Gen Z whenever I say that. On fleek, the math ain't mathing, and it's kind of become like fast-paced cultural newsroom. I love Black Twitter. Then we have queer TikTok, which has become a lifeline for queer people who might not have those safe spaces in real life. It's a space to explore identity. And the thing that I love about digital home places is that sometimes it really is that deep, and people are just like getting into the thick of it when it comes to the conversations. But also, like, because it's online, like, it's also so unserious at the same time. Like, you can explore identity through humor and like POV skits and makeup transitions. You know what I'm saying? Like, one particular trend that really came through on TikTok recently for the queer community is queer elders of TikTok. So it's like older queer creators that were, quote unquote, mentoring youth with life advice. And sometimes they were like serious videos. But sometimes they were just like skits, or like, get ready with me while I do my makeup and give you life advice. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's a cool thing about a digital home place, is that it's serious and also unserious all at the same time. And then my favorite niche when it comes to digital home places, diaspora meme pages, okay? Somali TikTok. When I first came across Qaf memes, I literally was like, oh my God, I've been welcomed home. It's like memes about Somali people, about the Somali culture, about the diaspora experience. Like, it literally, and that page pops off during Ramadan. Like, the Ramadan memes absolutely have me cackling. Oh my gosh. And then you have like subtle Asian traits. What was that page called? I don't know why I'm not Asian, but the way I was like, let me get in on this. Because as an ethnic girly, I was like, I see you with some of these memes. But there's like all of these diaspora meme pages that like just process this third culture identity that we're living in. And like, again, as I said, it was also like serious but unserious. Like, there's a lot of beauty and comedy that kind of captures the being, neither fully here nor there. Something that I have, a digital home place that I have kind of stepped into since getting my ADHD diagnosis, neurodivergent TikTok come through, and I love it. It's been like good comedy, but also good place to like learn and understand myself a bit more. Especially when it comes to like sometimes the healthcare. I mean, you're not coming through, so it's nice having that community and getting an education online. There's also the digital home place for the chronic illness communities, like people finding support for long COVID and PCOS and endometriosis. And, often, these are conditions often dismissed by doctors. So people are sharing hacks and routines, but also solidarity and humor. And I think these digital home places, as our Queen Bell Hooks has said, is places where people can breathe and be themselves and be held. There is this immediate sense of belonging. You're not the only one anymore. Your, quote unquote, weird is normal. And because there's this immediate sense of belonging, it removes the need for explanation. There's no need for a backstory. There's really no need for a context. Like, people just get it. As I say this, though, I will put a little disclaimer out there that, among these like digital home places, I'm not implying that everyone's thinks the same and has experienced the same thing. Like, there's no homogenous experience to being neurodivergent or to being part of the diaspora community or to being queer or to having a chronic illness. Like, it is complicated than that. But I think, these digital home places, there's like, if it was a Venn diagram, I mean, the areas where the circles overlap, that's you don't need that's a sense of immediate belonging there. You don't need to explain that because y'all see each other. You know what I'm saying? They're also really healing because they give language to identity. Like if you think about the terms like high masking, emotional labor, code switching, gentle parenting, quiet quitting, all of those, like, I'm not saying that they came from these digital online communities, but like these communities have really like championed these terms and given like so much, even like more vocabulary to add to your toolkit to understand and explore your identity more. It's also healing because it allows for joy. And I think just stepping back from this corridor specifically, we need more joy in our lives in general, but also like in our activism as well. We need that joy and humor and that fun. And so, healing doesn't just have to be heavy. It can be memes. It can be, little duets and stitches and skits and, the TikTok-y lip syncing sound bites. And also, I think another reason why these spaces are so healing is that it connects people across borders. It doesn't matter if you're all the way in Antarctica. As long as you got Wi-Fi, you're good. You've got your community with you right there. It doesn't actually need to physically exist in your neighborhood, which I think is so helpful because the decline of like third spaces or just like common spaces is very real. The pinch is being felt by all of us. And also, it's not always accessible for people to be just out and about like that. So it's really nice that it can connect people just like that. Which I think is so healing. And this is going to sound so crazy. Okay, y'all, side tangent, y'all. We could do this together. So I started my like neurodivergent journey when I went to go get my hearing checked. At the pharmacy that I work at, you can get your like hearing tested, which is nice to do. If if you're waiting for your prescription anyway, might as well. I failed that test, and they invited me to go into the clinic to get further testing done. And you know what? Homegirl could have definitely delivered it in a kind of way, but she kept it very real with me. She was like, listen, your hearing is actually fine, but you've got attention issues. Heavy on the attention. I was like, oh, okay. It took a really long time to actually get an appointment, but in the meantime, where did I go for the memes and the laughs in the community? I went to neurodivergent TikTok, and there were like memes about things that I was like, but wait, that just kind of explains my whole life. Like, it really was so eye-opening. And did I use those memes to help me come up, like, to help me use like the language to write a list of things that I'm struggling with? Heck yeah, I did. And so I think these digital home places can be so healing. But let's zoom out, because echo chambers, they're not just accidents, and they are structural outcomes of platform design. And I think it's really good, when we're talking about, how awesome these digital home places can be, it's also really important to think about, how they got there. And I think knowing that, I don't know, it helps us all just give us that awareness and how we engage with it. So algorithms is like a machine. This algorithm machine, oh my gosh, it's like a monster, because it rewards similarity and extremity. So, algorithms are not built to nurture nuance. As far as algorithms are concerned, there is black and white. There is no shades of gray. That just honestly doesn't exist. So they're built to maximize watch time and clicks and shares, comments, emotional reaction. So it's like when you think about that, what metrics are used, all of those things are like quick, instantaneous, like content that triggers emotion the fastest spreads the quickest, whether it's anger or pride or outrage or validation. The algorithm, if it had a voice, this is exactly what it would sound like. You lingered on a video about racism? Bet. Here's 800 more. You watched one conspiracy analysis? Pipeline unlocked, baby. You paused on one political video? Welcome to election TikTok. And so, your entire worldview, just like that, can become a curated museum exhibit. And again, I know I started off this episode kind of talking about how healing and amazing these places are, and they are. It is amazing, but it's so easy to be all of a sudden now you're in this echo chamber, and knowing that the algorithm rewards some similarity and extremity, you can see how it can become this curated museum exhibit. And you can definitely see the impacts of the algorithm machine when you think about the Tradwife pipeline, when all of a sudden you're looking at real cozy recipe videos and then it switches to hardcore patriarchal ideology. Then we have the wellness to conspiracy pipeline, and then, the yoga girlies, somehow the algorithm is, pushing them to anti-vax content. And then we have the rapid rise of TikTok political commentators, regardless of, whether they're left-leaning or right-leaning. And they go viral, dude, but not for complexity, but for hot takes. And then we have the Andrew Tate-ification of it all, and this algorithm machine that has just pushed this radicalized Andrew Tate content among young boys worldwide. And it just honestly, it feeds itself. So even if you just watch one little thing, because the algorithm machine feeds itself, all of a sudden you're just living in this echo chamber and you're just not realizing it. And I think also because the way the algorithm is set up, when we think about content creators or influencers, their identity very much becomes their brand. I was born when we had the internet around, but it really wasn't infiltrated into our lives the way that it is now, which I am very grateful for. I am the generation where, we would go out and then post every single photo and turn it into a Facebook album. And the Facebook albums, they were always they were so not creative names. They were da-da-da 16th, picnic outs. We literally said, this is my diary. And because we said, this is my diary, we were our goofy ass selves on the internet. That's exactly what it was. Because what do you mean? We were just writing on each other's walls hey, how you doing? Or, hey, did you watch that show? Hey, give me a call. And then in response to that, we would post on that person's wall. We really... Wow, we just treated it like our diary. And side note, it kind of cracks me up now that the millennial, nostalgic, hopeful, 2010s era is being really romanticized on TikTok at the moment. interesting. But anyways, because the algorithm is set up the way that it is, identity really becomes a brand. And so if you think about the platforms that we all engage with, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, the most platforms reward the most aesthetic version of your identity, which is the loudest version, the most dramatic version, and the most shareable version. Nuance online, low engagement, but simplicity equals being viral. And so I think it's easier to kind of lean into that performative identity and not an authentic identity. For example, the rise of that girl aesthetic. I mean, a billion people could come to mind right now, but even just saying that girl, there's like images, that come to mind, and like wellness has kind of become this performance. And then another example that I can think of is like diaspora creators, feeling that pressure to be funny 24/7, or like perform trauma, or like, just people performing their like queerness or blackness or feminism in ways that the algorithm likes, which actually may not align with their lived reality. So when you think about it like that, we stop being people and we become brands. And when it's kind of like leaning into this performance like that, you can see how, communities can become ideological mirrors. Like when everyone in your space looks like you, thinks like you, votes like you, uses the same vocabulary as you stop encountering difference. That's when you're living in that echo chamber. And that's when, dissent can feel like betrayal, and nuance can feel like violence. Questioning feels like disloyalty, and compromise feels like weakness. And this is how binary thinking is born, right? It's us versus them, safe versus unsafe, inside versus outside, left versus right. And again, as I say this out loud, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. There are some things that and this is where I'm embracing the complexity and the nuance of it all. And this is where I'm not saying that I hold all of the answers. But for example, whether it's online or in person, I'm not entertaining conversations about whether or not there's a genocide in Gaza, or whether or not, Black people's lives matter. Like, I just remember in the madness that was 2020, instead of discussing like structural racism and the harms of that, there was so much noise online and also in person where people were just like justifying Black people's humanity. Like, and to me, that was wild. I was like, I'm not engaging in conversations like that. So I'm not saying that, you can't have for yourself a line. But all I'm saying is that, but what I'm saying at the same time is that when you're living in an echo chamber, you stop encountering difference, nuance and questioning and compromise and dissent. It can feel like, it can feel like an attack. It can feel like violence, disloyalty, betrayal, and weakness. And it's from that space where binary thinking, is born. Like, even for yourself, can you think of a moment where you're like, your feed all of a sudden became, one-sided? And how did that, being exposed to that one angle, how did it make you feel? Did it make you feel comforted, protected, overwhelmed, claustrophobic? And just on the note of differences, the way that I think about it is, especially, of course, if I've got the capacity, if I'm in a good headspace, I will go out of my way to consume content that is different to how I think about things. Because even in that difference, even if I don't change my mind about something, I learn something, whether there's, it reaffirms how I believe because of a specific reason, whether it opens my eyes to how other people move through this world. And again, it doesn't mean that I all of a sudden agree with them, but I'm like, oh, I'm understanding how you've gotten to that conclusion. And the more that I've done that, honestly, truly, I've realized that, most of the time people land on things because of their specific life experiences. And this, life experiences have, made them think about issues in a particular way. But if they hadn't gone through that, maybe they wouldn't have landed on that conclusion. And I know it sounds like I'm talking in circles right now, so I'm going to just be specific by using an example. So good old Joanne, J.K. Rowling, I do not agree with the things that they say about the trans community, but I was listening to a podcast about, how they, got to that belief, and there was like violence involved. And so I think now when I am processing just any take that they have, you can see that it's really coming from this fear of men. And again, it doesn't all of a sudden mean that I agree with where Joanne is coming from, but then it then makes me curious and empathetic about how can we support not just specifically women, but anyone who's gone through violence like that, and help provide avenues for them to process what has happened to them. I mean, if I ever had the opportunity to discuss this with Joanne herself directly, I would also be saying the same thing to her face. But I feel like maybe the way that she's, landed on her thoughts and beliefs about the trans community, it seems like it's informed by this fear. And again, I'm not taking away from her experience. I'm not trying to invalidate the violence that she's gone through. But it did teach me something. And I think, there's always, well, for me anyway, there's always been value, and I've kind of gone out of my way to consume content that is in opposition to how I feel about the world and how I look at the world. And, there's a lot of harm about, I think, to the binary thinking. Like, the cost of this binary thinking is a lot. It's quite hurtful, because yes, these digital home places can be quite healing, but when it's combined with the algorithm machine, when it's combined with politics and identity, it can hurt. They completely collapse human complexity, and something that's so complex now becomes flatlined into this like 2D. And the reason why is because these binary worlds demand binary identities. Like, you must be a good feminist, whatever that looks like. You must be the perfect activist. You must be a consistent political thinker. You must flawlessly be anti-oppressive. You must always be aligned with the community's current stance. And I think that rigid identity categories, they flatten us. They don't liberate us, because when there's this demand for a binary identity, and you must be all of XYZ, you then lose the permission to evolve and outgrow ideas, make mistakes, hold contradictions. And I think I will be heavy on the hold contradictions, because so many things can be true at the same time. You also lose permission to be unsure, and particularly online, because it's online, things move so fast. Also the rise of cancel culture, people are punished for changing their mind. if we think about cancel culture waves targeting creators who have old tweets. And again, I'm not saying that is not valid, but also at the same time, there's not that room for human complexity and for people to outgrow that, especially if they've given us evidence that that's just not who they are anymore. And okay, with all of these pop culture examples, I'm not saying that there's zero validity to them, okay? But just hear me out. The expectation for influencers to instantly comment on political crises. I think that binary thinking is quite a lot. One person that kept coming up actually while I was doing research for this episode was Taylor Swift. And there's a lot of noise online about it's really unfair that Taylor Swift is being criticized for when she chooses to be political. And I think that whole what should we expect of celebrities is very complicated. And I have to be, if we're speaking about Taylor Swift, I feel like I have to be very upfront about this, that there are some songs that she has which are absolute bangers, but I am an ethical hater in the sense that, I feel like she definitely has profited from being left-leaning, I think she definitely has profited from aligning herself with being an ally to marginalized communities, specifically, the Black community, queer community. But when it comes to it, she really has not a lot to say. And so I think, there's a certain extent to where that is valid, especially if these people are profiting off this and their platform is being built off this. But also on the other hand, I'm just like, we need that heat for our politicians. We need that heat for our systems. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's complicated. But Taylor Swift did come up a lot in the research for this episode. But my point is that binary thinking can suffocate our humanity. And I think, a lot of this conversation is like the left versus right. But the thing is, echo chambers, they intensify polarization. It actually, when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, it isn't just a left versus right thing. Every side gets radicalized in its own way, because when you only hear from your own group, it alienates opposing views. Other groups become caricatures. I feel like I said that characters. I feel like I said that word incorrectly. But people become enemies and nuance evaporates. Research shows that TikTok's recommendation algorithm amplifies outrage. YouTube radicalizes viewers through the suggested videos. Facebook groups, they grow more extreme over time. Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, it pushes conflict to the top. We saw this during the 2024 US election. There were mini cults created around the candidates. Climate change discourse is now turning into purity battles, I'm better than you, instead of coalition and talking about change and talking about what are the levers we can push in our current systems. You also see this a lot online these days, where there's a fragmentation among the left progressive community to either not progressive enough, versus too extreme. And then you've got the right kind of splintering into moderates versus far right populists. And the danger about this everything just being amplified and radicalized is that people just completely dehumanize each other. you know, we don't even get to disagreement anymore. We've gone straight to disdain. Like, you know, it's very easy to stop asking yourself, like, what shaped their worldview, and just immediately say, like, you know, they're dumb, they're evil, they're brainwashed. And that is emotional polarization, friends. You know, online behaviors all of a sudden become dragging people, subtweeting, dogpiling, humiliating people. And you're not arguing with the person now, you're just arguing with a stereotype. And I think the danger of dehumanizing each other is that honestly, my belief, hand on heart, is that if we were all to have, like, I say we as a collective, just society as a whole, if we were to get so real about our conversation, in the sense that we came in with so much emotional maturity, awareness, curiosity, and empathy, I think we'd find that the majority of people actually we're all swimming in the same boat. But we cannot have, like, the barrier to having conversations like that is dehumanization, and that's become so commonplace online. And also, I think another thing that, like, reinforces these identities is when trauma becomes content. Because when identity and algorithms mix together, trauma becomes a performance. Platforms reward crying videos and stories about harm, and vulnerability as entertainment, and pain as currency. You know, emotions stick to identities, and online they stick even harder. You know, and you see this online, like, people exploiting their own trauma for, you know, being viral, people feeling pressured to share abuse stories to be seen as authentic. And so I think where the gap is, because I think we need both online and offline spaces, is that online communities is accessible, comforting, and it's curated. Ain't nothing wrong with that, right? Offline community is messy, it's inconvenient, imperfect, but offline community, that's where we learn disagreement, we learn negotiation, intergenerational learning, conflict resolution, and to coexist with people unlike us. So when we only live online, which, you know, judging by our screen times, it seems like we online and we've been online, we lose this. What do they say about muscles? If you don't lose it, you lose it. It's exactly like that. And I think that's how the binary, polarized worlds become permanent. And it is really important to talk about this, because I'm not here saying that these digital home places are bad or social media is bad, but this is, like, tied to polarization, our overall democracy, and collective well-being. Like, democracies, there's no room for democracy in binary thinking. Like, polarized societies are easier to manipulate, easier to destabilize, less able to compromise, and more vulnerable to misinformation. And ever since COVID, man, I think we've all seen the impacts of misinformation. So there's no room for democracy when, you know, society is so polarized. And also social justice movements, they kind of lose their power when there's this, like, polarization, because movements need that difference, because from that difference comes that dialogue and disagreement and coalition. But binary thinking kills that coalition by turning everything into purity politics, loyalty tests, ideological performance. And I see this heavily in, like, the climate change space. The way that we're all trying to, you know, outdo each other with how dedicated we are to to the cause, to the point where I've seen legit people dragging each other on the internet for like the material of the straw that they use, like is so wild. And I think like the purity politics and the loyalty tests, they can fracture movements internally. For example, climate activists divided into, abolition versus reform. Feminism split into competing waves, like which wave of feminism is better, and the waves kind of like competing against each other to claim moral superiority. Among the queer community, there's discourse that which has now turned into gatekeeping over labels. And people stop learning, period, when that starts to happen. And I think that's dangerous because you always need to learn. You always need to stay on your toes because if you are living in a polarized world and you're living in an echo chamber, learning becomes confirmation, not transformation. And transformation, that happens when there's a bit of pressure, when there is a bit of discomfort, like you need, when there's that discourse, but you stop that learning and all it ever becomes is confirmation. And I think also another way that is quite dangerous is that identity becomes kind of like a prison instead of power, right? Because you start performing instead of being. You start curating, instead of exploring. And you start sticking to a one identity lane instead of growing. And I think that's dangerous. Now, I'm not going to say that I hold all of the answers. I think this is something that we need to all figure out collectively. But, let's start with some practical solutions. And, let's start with some things that we can do to forge a healthier way going forward. So I think the first thing is resisting that binary thinking, like constantly asking yourself, what else could be true? What is the nuance here? Who benefits from this oversimplification? Is this a complex issue being flattened for virality? And I think these questions are really important to ask yourself because, even if you're engaging with content and you're like, yeah, like I really, that I identify with that. I agree with that. Sometimes when it's simplified so much and that nuance is lost, like that opportunity to learn about or understand the issue at hand on a deeper level is lost. And I think this is really important to understand when you couple it with the fact that, like, just because, there's a certain group of people who all identify a certain way, they all agree with a particular worldview, it doesn't mean that they actually all have the same values. It doesn't actually mean that they all are coming from the same privilege. It doesn't mean that they all got to that same conclusion the same way. And I hope I'm making myself clear, like, when I say this, and I'm not just taking you for a ride. But, like, I think, in my life, and I can only ever speak for myself, so this is all anecdotally, but the mahi that I've done in, like, certain social justice spaces, and I think and I have been clocked on this, but, I kind of naively made that assumption that because we all think the same way, we all kind of got here the same way. Like, we all took the same, like, thought path to get to this point. And that's not true. And just because you all got to the same conclusion, it doesn't mean that there's not more learning to do. And to kind of explain what I'm trying to say, I'll just give you an example from my own life. So I was doing this work for this kaupapa, and the kaupapa was around Black Lives Matter, and there were people who were involved in this who weren't Black, and the way that they kind of like recreated the certain aspects of like whiteness, I was like, oh, we are all saying the same things, but somehow you're not understanding the issue. You're not seeing the issue at hand the same way that I'm seeing it. Like the way that I'm looking at it, I'm not saying that I've got nothing to learn, but I think I can say this because I am a Black person, and unfortunately I haven't had to educate myself to know this. I know this because I've experienced this. If we were looking at an image, I'm seeing it in detail, okay? I'm seeing I'm seeing the individual strokes. This person was looking at the same image and they just saw the outline, honey. They just saw the outline. And so the way that they came into the space and just kind of recreated the similar harmful dynamics, I was like, oh, damn. And I didn't feel comfortable enough to tell them, but I actually, after that, there was like a certain time where they were there, and then all of a sudden they just stopped coming. So I'm not too sure what happened there, and there's no point in speculating that, but that's what I'm trying to say. Like, just because you are saying the same thing, it doesn't mean that you got there the same way. And so that means, therefore, there's always learning to be had. There's always like something to unpack, something to learn more about, something to question. And you're never going to think that if you're living in an echo chamber and you're like, yes, we all think the same way. And especially when the binary thinking like completely removes the nuance from things, and something that's quite complex is flattened, then the algorithm is just like, if we're running with that analogy that I had about the images, the algorithm is just spitting out the outline to us. There's no opportunity to learn more. And so I think it's really important that we always ask ourselves the questions of like, what else could be true? What is the nuance here? Who benefits from this oversimplification? Is this a complex issue being flattened for virality? Always ask yourself that. I think you'll be surprised. Another thing that I think is important to try and do is seeking long form content. So I'm not saying that you have to be offline for this, but like podcasts, essays, books, that slowness, because they're longer, and I think is a really good interruption for that polarization, because you've got breathing room. They slow your brain down so you can think about, you can really digest. Like if we think about, especially the short form content on like Instagram and TikTok, it's like being fed all the time, back to back to back. Like you've gone to an auntie's house and you're being well fed. Like you're getting rolled out of the house because auntie is feeding you that much. You feel rude saying no to auntie, so you're just getting fed, food. But I think long form content, you can slowly enjoy your food. There's that slowness there that interrupts that polarization. So the more podcasts and essays and books you can get into, the better. I think another thing that we can all do is to diversify our digital inputs. And this is not to punish yourself, but to widen your understanding. And again, I understand if you need to do this at your own pace, you know yourself best. Make sure you're in a good headspace, because depending on the content and the topic at hand, it can be quite a lot. So, make sure you're in a good headspace and you've got the capacity. But diversifying your digital inputs is really good to widen your understanding, because you can, and so, do this intentionally. But if you create intentionally, you can follow thinkers who you disagree with, but respectfully. You can read the global news, not just Western media. You can follow creators outside of your identity group. And diversifying removes you from that echo chamber, and removing yourself from that echo chamber interrupts that polarization. And I think the last thing that you can do that's really important is building that offline community. Okay, you don't want to be missing out on those skills that the offline community gives us. Those offline skills of dialogue and that intergenerational knowledge as well, because older folk are not really going to be online like the same way we are. So go to local events and join groups and talk to elders, talk to people younger than you, find that connection outside of that algorithm. Get used to having conversations in real life where you're not in agreement with each other. Lean into that discomfort, lean into that messiness, because that messiness, that is where our humanity lies. And the more we are able to gain back our humanity, the more we can silence that algorithm machine and it's messy as trying to polarize all of us. So identity spaces, our digital home places, they can be medicine, right? They can save lives and create that belonging and build culture and offer language to the voiceless. But we also need to, deal with the fact that we live in a world where everything is being flattened into binaries, and the algorithm wants you to be predictable and consistent and to bring the money home. So we have to protect our complexity, because we are humans, all right? We're not an aesthetic. We're not a brand. We're not an ideology. We're not a category. We are a human being, which means being contradictory and evolving and nuanced and soft. And so, echo chambers amplify the echo. So what are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the echo or the humanity underneath it? And why did that give when Oprah Winfrey went, were you silent or silenced? She did eat with that, but also perhaps crumbs were left, and maybe I left crumbs with that outro. But anyways, thank you for tuning into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns, and may you have a wonderful, challenging and transformative online and offline spaces. And catch you for the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.